No, this is what we were initially talking about, and this is what we wanted to discuss. So I want to ask you again, what are your opinions on the form that was produced? Maybe you want to pick a single element and ask a question concerning this element, or express something you have thought while seeing the exhibition. They're all scared.
I have a question. Like in general, when you start your researching, do you know it before the particular visual style that you're going to apply, or it came through your work? What was the exact process, aesthetic process in your mind to produce that kind of visual language?
In my case, the aesthetics cannot be disengaged from the reality. So one of the things I knew that couldn't be done is to be with Rab when they're doing the killings. Obviously, that could not happen. Well, even if I wanted a particular aesthetics, that situation could not arise. So it had to be done differently. And what I largely thought about was images that would have a very large degree of ambiguity, that would not be very clear. And this was a deliberate method of moving away from the documentary style. Since the documentary, there were two aspects. One is the documentary style could not be practically done, and two, the documentary approach had been used, attempted, and failed. So you needed to readdress that thing. So rather than look at it as an inadequacy of the documentary mode, take on the fact that we are moving away as a feature. Therefore, for instance, in this picture, one very important aspect is, for the average person, there is no direct linkage. What does this have to do with crossfire? And it's only when you find out that in the case studies, a body is found in a paddy field, and the explanation given by Rab is that there was a fire, there was many people shooting at each other, there was fighting, there were many people shooting at each other, one person died, and that was what was found. And then the local audience says, well, in a rice field, if there's a fight, then it affects the rice. How come the rice is unaffected, except for where the body was? Yeah. So that starts off. It might not have come to everyone, but certainly that was what I was looking at. And then you look perhaps to the Google map to find the reference, and you find in this particular instance that the body that was found had 4 bullet holes, but the shirt that he was wearing had no bullet holes. So then how these stories are manufactured and what those things mean. But it was very, very deliberately done in a sense that people would have to work hard at finding it. And one of the points of the exercise was that we would not make it very easy for people to come to a conclusion. They would need to engage with the process, they would need to ask themselves questions, and sometimes there is no one answer. To stimulate people intellectually and emotionally than to inform people. So 2 levels, and again, this is one of the things that has to be considered. For instance, one picture, we talked about the brochure and its inadequacies. I think one of the failings also is this image, which for a Bangladeshi audience is very easy to read, because that's the first thing that Rab does. It makes the person sign a blank document, which they can use in any way that they want. Now, for a Bangladeshi who knows the context, it's easy to read. For someone who doesn't, it's much more complex. So therefore, even in the use of some of these things, what you say is perfectly correct. One needs to gauge how a particular audience would relate to it, and what we were looking at really was that the Google map and some other things would have the wider audience. The exhibition space would deal with the audience visiting the premises, and therefore the darkness, the sound leaking through from the video, the fact that walking through the place, some didn't work as well. I'd actually wanted to be darker than it was, but you know, we bought the lights we could in the marketplace, and we felt when we did it that it would be dark. In practice, it wasn't. I'd actually wanted a darker space. The fact that we used the downstairs gallery as opposed to the upstairs gallery was also part of that strategy, because that has more intimate spaces, you can maneuver through it, it's broken up and things like that. But in terms of the public audience, it will not have the same effect, and we need to work out how that might be.
Whose name is this?
This is a person in Batshala, and again we talked to him, explaining what it was, whether he was concerned about this writing, but it was chosen because he has a handwriting which is not particularly polished, which is also a lot of the people that RAB have killed are people who would have had lower levels of literacy in many situations. So we felt this was more descriptive of the type of people RAB were targeting.
You could have done a whole wall of white papers, or maybe have the board where you had us, the participation element, one of the two, could have been white sheets of paper that everybody would sign to.
Yes,
that was a way of engaging towards this.
One of the things I thought of doing was to engage some of the people, the relatives, the survivors of these, but obviously they were too scared, and we had to protect, so that could not be done.
But I'm not sure I'm asking too many
please,
questions. I think you should ask something. Comments and questions. I'm just curious about, you have been doing documentary photography and so powerfully several exhibitions in different countries. So for this exhibition is definitely part of experiment. And if I ask you, what's your own evaluation of your work? How do you describe it?
As an artist, I always want to push myself. And so if you look at the shows that we've had, the Positive Lives, Migrant Labour, Brahmaputra, Upper Class British, and this one, each show is completely different. That is, as an artist, trying to broach new territory, but I'm also an activist. And each of these also engages with what works and what doesn't. And certainly, quite apart from an artistic point of view, the reason for doing this was to engage with an audience in a way in which they had not been engaged with before. And that applies to an extent where you have, say, poverty fatigue and other statements which are made where photojournalists the world over produce certain types of images which no longer move or provoke people sufficiently. So the point was to do that. How successful it's been, I don't know. I think it's premature to gauge. Certainly in terms of the fact that it's galvanized public opinion, that's without doubt, that is happening. The fact that the human change took place and are taking place, the protests that are taking place every day, the number of people that are coming on board and expressing solidarity, including some of the people who are challenging it. I mean, I've had one of the first comments, Bangladeshi comments that came up after the BD24 news was a person saying RAB killings must continue because these, they're killing all these terrorists and vermin and criminals, and therefore this must continue. And I didn't have to do anything about that. The fact that other people took it on, and then, that person really had to defend himself against public opinion as opposed to my opinion, I thought was a very interesting aspect. But to take it further in terms of what I'm looking at, I certainly think that this is an interesting place to go to, also from a different strategic perspective, because one of the things that has happened, certainly in our country, is that photography has not been given the same space as other art forms have, so we need to occupy those spaces. I found it interesting that Bengal Gallery was showing the work that it was doing, not merely because of what it is, but also because it presents itself as a gallery of fine arts, and presents work which is probably as far away from fine arts as one could imagine.
And it is also presenting an image of Bangladesh.
Yeah.
We talked about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So, but the point is, that is an interesting shift. Now, let's look at the Struggle for Democracy show. At that time, not a single gallery in Bangladesh was prepared to show that work.